Painting a cute llama is easier than you think, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it, no matter your skill level. Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. And with that said, grab your drawing tools and let's get started. As usual, we are going to start by creating a new canvas so we have somewhere to draw. For reference, these are the dimensions of the canvas that I will be using, but make sure you pick something that works for your own project requirements. Now, if you're not exactly sure how to pick a canvas size, I have a video in which I'm going to teach you everything you need to know in order to make a decision, so I will link that in the description below. Now, I also often get questions on how to have this little reference image here at the top. You simply access the Canva menu from the wrench icon menu and then activate the reference right here. You're then going to have the option to import an image as your reference, and that's what you would do. So I will link my illustration in the description below if you want to download it and use it as your reference. Now here, just a quick note, the only reason I'm using this file is, well, these dimensions is because I'm painting in a pre-textured file, which as you can see has a bit of a paper texture to it. If you don't have that file, don't worry, I'm going to give you tips on how to have some sort of a texture without it. But if you want to check it out, it will be linked in the description below as well. It is part of my big brush bundle. So with that said, we are going to start by doing a very rough sketch of the llama. So create a new layer, rename it to sketch, and pick any color you want for sketching because we're not going to see the sketch in the final result, so the color doesn't matter. I like to sketch with just a neutral gray. And in this tutorial, I'm always going to be suggesting two different kinds of brushes. So one is going to be a brush that comes with Procreate, so it's, totally free and it can allow you to follow along just fine, so no need to worry. And the other brush is going to be a brush from my big brush bundle from the watercolor pack. So those brushes are going to allow you to save some time and get more professional results overall, but they're not essential. So don't worry, you don't need to buy anything to follow this video. That being said, if you want to check out the brushes, they will be linked in the description below as well, and there's always a special promo code for the YouTube people. Now, especially for the sketch, the brushes don't matter because we're not going to see it in the final result, so pick something you're comfortable with. That might be the HP pencil from the sketching panel, so a free brush, or if you have the watercolor brushes, you could use the coloring pencil. Here, you're going to start by drawing two lines to delimitate the size of the head, making sure that you have a good space above and below for the neck and the ears, and then you're going to draw an oval that kind of fills that space. You're then going to draw the neck of your llama, so it could be straight or slightly curved in either directions, that's totally up to you. And two very nice, big, kind of teardrop shaped ears, so kind of like that. You're also going to draw a vertical line in the middle of the circle of the head or the oval of the head, and then a horizontal line. So our traditional little plus sign here, which is going to help us place the facial features like the eyes. Here I'm gonna go with just curved eyes, like closed, cute eyes. But if you wanted, you could just close them in the bottom to have open eyes. So to have open eyes, you need to close the line, whatever. That's a bit confusing. And in terms of the nose, just for the sketch right now, we're going to go with kind of this basic shape, but we're going to refine it later. And I like to have the nose being the same width as the space between the eyes. And then you can draw the corners of the mouth and then connect the corners of the mouth with this rounded W shape. And you could, if you want, refine the shape of the head, kind of squeezing the part around the eyes, but otherwise that's it for the sketch, believe it or not. I know it looks crazy right now, but that's enough information to start adding the colors. So now that we have something that resembles a worm with ears, we're going to add the colors to kind of just make it look like a llama. But first, I personally like to set the blending mode of my sketch to multiply, which is going to allow us to see the sketch really well on dark colors, even if we lower the opacity. So lowering the opacity makes it so that the sketch is not, too much in our face and it's not too distracting, but having multiply helps to still see it on dark colors. So you could do that if you want. And then we're going to create a new layer, put it below the sketch layer, and rename this one to base color. You could really use any color you want for your llama. If you want, I have a color palette here that you can download so you can have the same colors as I do. But as usual, I recommend you try and pick your own colors because that's good practice, especially when we have simple colors like that. And I'm going to start with kind of this light cream color. And here for brushes, you have a few options. You could pick in the airbrushing panel the hard brush and then lower the opacity somewhere between 30 and 40%. Basically, the goal, what we want here is to have an overlap so that when we draw separate strokes, they're overlapping and getting darker and darker. So lowering the opacity of your brush is going to do that. Otherwise, if you do have the watercolor brushes at this stage, you would pick the dark edges watercolor. So it's pretty much, a brush with transparency as well, but in comparison with the hard brush, it does have some randomness and a little bit of texture with it. So it's going to just, like I was saying, save you some time, but you could get similar results with the hard brush. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to draw one solid shape for the neck. So with just, one stroke, ideally. If you have multiple strokes, you're going to start seeing some overlays like I have here. Try to avoid that, but if you have them, that's totally okay. We're going to blend everything in later at the end anyway, so not that big of a deal. And then you're going to do the same thing for the head, so just one big stroke to color in the shape of the head. And I personally like to leave the part around the nose and the mouth just white because we're going to color that with gray later, and so we want to avoid having too much color now because otherwise when we overlap with gray, the gray is going to look brown and we don't want that, we just want gray. So you're also going to just color the base shape for the ears. Same thing, trying to do it in one stroke for each ear. But if that's not possible for you, if you struggle drawing big shapes with one stroke without lifting your pencil, don't worry about it, just have a bunch of overlays and we're going to deal with that later. Now here, if you're drawing a llama that is just one color, you would start overlapping the same color below the face or around the neck area to create a shadow. And you would do that with tiny little strokes like this because later that's going to help us build a texture that looks a little bit like fur. Now here I'm going to later have some spots on my llama, I guess, so I'm not going to work on the neck too much, but the top of my head is going to be cream. So I'm just going to draw a bunch of little hairs like this. And this is where we really want to have those overlays. So this is what I was talking about with the transparency of the brush. We're going to draw a bunch of strokes on top of each other, and when they start being on top of each other, they get darker. So for now, it's going to look crazy, but that's what we're doing. So if you want to have multiple colors on your llama, you could just go ahead, change your colors. I'm going to go with a chocolate brown and do the same thing. So just drawing a bunch of strokes, making sure your brush is not too big or too small. You want a medium brush, and the exact size is going to depend on the size of the canvas. So, you need to experiment here, and there's no really like one precise size here, so you can just experiment, and if you get something that looks right, then it's probably right. And you can draw with a secondary color as many different kind of spots or areas on your llama as you want. I'm gonna go with kind of the bottom of the face being brown and then a few spots on the neck, but you could do whatever you desire here. And at this stage, it's going to look crazy bad, so trust me, that's totally okay. We're going to fix it later. Just trust the process for now. It's gonna be fine. One thing that might be nice though, if you have multiple colors on your llama, is to have the ears be the darkest part. That way they really come out and pop out of the piece. Otherwise they might kind of get lost if you're just drawing them in a cream color. So I like to have them brown just so we can see them well. And you can use the overlapping, I was going to say feature, but you can use the overlap here to draw a darker part in the middle of the ear to make it look like there's kind of a, like the ear hole, I guess. You know what I'm talking about. Now, the middle part of the face, or the nose and the mouth, you might want to use a gray. I think it looks good, and that's kind of what llamas have. They have gray noses, so just a neutral gray, nothing crazy here either. And with the same brush, so either the hard brush or the dark edges watercolor, you can go ahead and start by outlining the part below the mouth and kind of creating this half moon shape like this. And darkening, so just overlapping your gray multiple times. The closer you get towards the top part of the W, I guess, the darker it's going to be because that's where the mouth is. Then you can also color in gray the part between the mouth and the nose, and then color the nose itself, so this kind of big triangular shape. You might also want to make the bottom of the nose darker, so overlapping your stroke, 2, 3, 4 times, depending on the gray you're using. And honestly, that's enough for the colors. I know, like I said, it looks crazy, but we're going to start blending everything, and I promise it's going to look much better with the blending. So in terms of blending, you have a few options here. Usually I recommend, if you're using the free brushes, to go with the smudge tool and to use the soft brush. But here you might want to use the stucco brush from the painting panel because it does have a little bit of texture, as you can see. And especially if you lower the opacity of your smudge tool when using the stucco brush, you're going to be able to use that texture to create the illusion of fur and paper. If you use that well, I'm going to give you tips on how to do that, but that could be a good option. But if you do have the watercolor brushes, go ahead and pick the water drag. So not the water blender, which is what we usually use, but the water drag here. Now, what we're going to do, no matter the brush you're using, no matter the smudge tool you're using, you're going to make sure that you do short strokes in the direction of the fur. So going up and down in the direction of the fur. And you can see if you're using the water drag especially, it's going to drag the color around, kind of like if you were painting on real paper with real watercolor and you were adding a little bit of water to your watercolor, it would kind of, drag it on the paper. So by doing that, you're going to blend the crazy, weird digital strokes that we created first. And it's going to do a few things, making it look, watercolory, so like it's flowy and organic. And it's also going to make it look like a bit more of a fur texture, I guess. Not like realistic fur, but watercolor fur. So just do that over your llama, making sure that you don't touch the nose and mouth part for now. So just touch the kind of fur area. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you watched this far in the video, please go ahead and leave a comment with the word, oh, I didn't think about it. Let's go with alpaca. That's going to confuse people. That's funny. So if you're new to the channel, you might be like, what's the deal with the secret password? I mean, it's kind of a game that we're playing now on the channel. Pretty much every single video, I hide a secret word. And if you've watched to that point, you just have to comment it below. And that does a few things. Well, it's kind of fun, first. And second, it's also really good because it gives me a lot of insight into how to edit and pace my videos better, which helps me to create better tutorials for you guys. So that's already a win-win. And it's also really cool because you guys know me, you see my face in the intro, you hear my voice throughout the entire video, but I have no idea who you guys are. And when you leave a comment, whatever that comment is, I get to see sometimes your name, sometimes your face, and it's just really cool to see who's part of the creative community that we're building here on this channel. So just leave a comment with the word alpaca, and then we're going to keep going. So we're just going to keep blending a little bit more. So once you're done blending the fur, it's time to attack this mouth area. Here, if you're using the watercolor brushes, you might want to shift to the water blender to have a bit more randomness. And if you're using the free brushes, you might want to switch your smudge tool to the soft brush in the airbrushing panel. Because here we don't really want to have that fur, draggy, vertical line texture. We want it to be super soft. So again, if you're using the smudge tool, that would be the soft brush from the airbrushing panel. But if you have the watercolor brushes, that would be setting your paintbrush to the water blender and then just going over the different parts that you needed to blend. So here, make sure that you do a good job blending, but don't overdo it. And what I mean by that is you want the bottom part of the nose to remain crisp and not blended because, it's a crisp line. And same thing with the mouth. You do want to blend the shadow below the mouth, but you want to make sure that the mouth line itself remains crisp and clean. So that's pretty good, but it looks a little bit crazy still. So we're going to start cleaning up our piece and adding some details so that it looks like a llama and not just like like a coffee stain or something. So at this stage, you might want to hide your sketch layer just to make sure that everything is blended nicely. Then you can reactivate it and create a new layer above the base color. Rename this new layer to details. And here you can use a super dark color. I like to avoid using pure blacks in general in my illustration, so I'm gonna go with a very dark brown color. And you can go back to the pencil you use for sketching, so it could be the HB pencil or the 6B pencil in the sketching panel, or if you have the watercolor bundle, you can pick the coloring pencil. And here all you're going to do is outline, redraw, whatever you want, some facial features that are not there yet. So what I mean by that is you would go ahead and draw the eyes. And here for the eyes, you can see I like to have the top part of the eye be a little bit thicker than the corners. And you might also add kind of I don't know what that would be, like another little line on the inner corners of the eyes. This is also where you would draw the nose and mouth part. So for the nose, you can see I'm going with some sort of like a wine glass shape almost. so super flowy right here. And one tip I have for you, when you're drawing characters in general, so not just llamas, any character that have mouths, putting a lot of emphasis on the corners of the mouth. So not necessarily the lips, but the corners of the mouth, because that's where a lot of the expression, the facial expression is perceived. Believe it or not, it's in the corners of the mouth. So I tend to draw really highly visible, let's say, corners of the mouth, and then leave the rest of the mouth not that intense. You might also want to draw some big nostrils like this. That's kind of very llama-esque. And oops, I had a little spot there. You could also add some tiny dots between the nose and the mouth. I don't know what they were called, but kind of, you know, like that. And at this point, if you want to go back and add some fur lines, this is the stage and the place where you would do it. So you could go back with one of the colors you used in the llama. So I'm going to go back with my chocolate brown and add, I don't know, like a little fringe to your llama, or some just random texture. So you can experiment with that, but that's obviously not essential. It kind of breaks, I guess, a little bit of the watercolor feel of the piece, but I really like it. I'm really not, believe it or not, I don't enjoy real watercolors that much. I quite struggle with them. So I always go back in with colored pencil whenever I'm drawing with real watercolors to put some emphasis on some pieces. So that's kind of what you can do at this stage. Now, once you have your details, feel free to go back and lower the opacity of the layer a little bit so that it blends better with the other colors, which can really help making it look more like watercolors. So that's, you know, a bit of a saving grace there, but yeah. Now here, before we start adding the glasses and all the other elements, you might want to go back to your base color layer and use your eraser to erase some spots. So here I'm gonna go with just the medium brush from the airbrushing panel, but you can really use whatever because we're going to blend later. And you could go ahead and erase this squiggly line on top of the nose, maybe also putting some emphasis on the top part of the mouth, basically just bringing a bit more light in the llama. And also, that's one thing that I would definitely recommend you do if that's the only part you erase, erasing around the eyes so that the eyes themselves pop a lot. You might also want to erase some random scribbles on top of the head so that we have this idea of light. And you might use this as an excuse to clean up your shape a little bit, although I'm going to give you tips later to clean up your llama with the liquify tool. So yeah, you can just go back and erase some spots and go back in with the smudge tool or the water drag to blend those erased spots later. So if you're using the smudge tool, you would set your smudge brush, is that it? to the sticker brush from the painting panel. But otherwise, if you have the watercolor brushes, you can go back, like I was saying, to the water drag as your paintbrush. Now here I'm going to stop talking, let you focus on making sure your colors are right, and I'm going to keep the video in the background so you can use it as a reference. I'm going to speed it up though so it doesn't take too long, and we're going to be in the next step in which we're going to add even more details, some sunglasses and other elements as desired. Awesome! So once you're done blending all your erased parts, you can go ahead and hide the sketch for now and just double check that everything is blended nicely again, but honestly, we don't need a sketch anymore at this point. And if you want to add shadows to your llama, you could use the selection tool, setting it to freehand and selecting the part of your llama that would be in the shadow, so in my case, the lower left, I guess. And then using the feather option, around 30%, to feather your selection, and making sure that the color fill option here is deactivated. That's super important. You can then go in the adjustment panel, selecting hue, saturation, and brightness to lower this part of your llama, which would create shadows. So that's a super quick way of adding shading without having to just go over all the colors manually. And you can also use this technique to create a super random selection. So again, selection tool, setting it to freehand, and then creating a feathering to your selection. Between 20 and 30% would say is usually a good range. And then using in the adjustment panel the hue, saturation, brightness tool to change the settings. So if you're using the free brushes, using this technique of creating a totally random selection and then playing with the different sliders in the hue, saturation, brightness panel can really help you give some randomness and more just a watercolor feel to your piece. So you could repeat this step as many times as you need to create some color variation, I should say, in your llama, especially if you're using the free brushes. Once you're happy with the color variation, you're going to create a new layer, rename it glasses if you want to have glasses, and we're going to go back to the brush that we used first to create the base colors for the llama. So either the hard brush in the airbrushing panel or the dark edges watercolor. Now here you're going to want to test the size of your brush first, because once we start drawing, we're just going to do one stroke and then use the perfect circle size. So make sure that you're happy with the width of your stroke. And then you can go in and draw a kind of very rough circle. Then hold your pencil on the screen and tap with another finger, and that's going to create a perfect circle. So you're going to do that on both sides, making sure that they're roughly the same size. Awesome, it's not more complicated than that. Although you might want to go back in and add the bridge of the glasses like that. Now you can also use the arrow tool here at the top to reposition your glasses. You can also set the arrow tool to uniform and resize the glasses. So do any adjustments you need at this stage. And you're probably going to notice that your glasses are kind of see-through. That's because we're using brushes with transparency, so I'm going to show you how to fix that. And that, by the way, is also a technique that you can use if you want to add a background behind your character. So basically all you're doing is right below the layer of the element that you want to not be transparent anymore, you can create a new layer and then just use the hard brush, making sure the opacity is back to 100%. And then with pure white, you can go and color behind the shape. So effectively, it's going to create a little barrier between the two elements, so between the glasses and the llama, or whatever other element you might be drawing in the background. So super simple, and it really doesn't need to be perfect here. It's kind of nice if it's not, because it plays into the organic flowiness of watercolor. So, you know, you can always do that whenever you have elements that overlap and you don't want to have any of the transparency. So that's a really quick way to do it. You could also use masks, but I know masks can be a little bit confusing. So for now, this is the technique we're going to use. But if you want to learn about masks, I will link in the description below a video about them. So you could check that as well. So you can see if we hide our layer with the white, we can see that the glasses are blending with the llama. It's not optimal, but the white just allows that to not happen. You can also go back to the color you use for the glass. By the way, I used a blue, as you can see, but you could go with whatever color you want. And going back with either the 6B pencil from the sketching panel or the coloring pencil from the watercolor brushes, and just outlining some parts of the glass. You don't go ahead and create a full-on outline, because that definitely doesn't look like watercolor, but you could outline some parts to just make them a little bit crisp and just a bit more interesting in general. Now you could also use the selection tool technique to have a bit more color variation in your glasses. So here I'm going to go and select the bottom part of glasses, then feather that selection quite a lot, so probably more around 30%, but that depends on the size of your canvas. And then you're going back to adjustment panel, the hue, saturation, and brightness section, lowering the brightness, upping the saturation, just doing tests, but you can see it just makes the glass a bit fun, a bit more fun. And more watercolory. It's not just like one big color. So you can experiment with that as much as you want, or you could just skip that step altogether. And one more fun thing that you might want to do to really bring your piece together is to add some splatters. So for that, you would create a new layer above everything. Rename this layer to splatters. I know, what a surprise. And you might want to use the blending mode linear burn here so that your splatters blend well with the color of the llama that is already there. Now in terms of color, you can use whatever you want. I'm going to go back with my chocolate brown. I think that's the one that's going to look the nicest. And you can go in the spray paint panel from Procreate and use the splatter brush, but it doesn't have a really watercolor splatter vibe to it. So that's not necessarily the one I would recommend. If you're using free brushes, the best bet is probably the G-Clay brush, still from the spray paint panel, but it's quite dense, so you need to use it really quite sparingly. If you have the watercolor brushes though, go ahead and pick, what a surprise, the splatter brush, and you can just very quickly add a few splatters to your piece. It's really not that big of a deal. Like, it takes 2 seconds, maybe even just 1, but it does add a lot of character, I feel, to your illustration. And if you feel the need to change the shape of your llama, at this stage you could select both the base color and the details layer, so just swiping them both with one finger towards the right, and then going back in the adjustment panel at the bottom, picking the liquify option, making sure that it's set to push. You can then just drag the colors around. So you can see here it looks crazy. We have a squiggly llama, that's not what we want. But you can use that tool to reshape your llama really quickly. You wouldn't want to completely change the shape, because then that starts stretching the pixels and it just look really low quality real quick. But you can use that tool to just slightly change the shape if you have a few parts of your llama that you don't think are quite right. And if you enjoyed this video and want to learn how to paint more cute animals, I highly recommend you check out this playlist, in which I'm going to teach you exactly that. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.